back to ASEAN-Japan Co-Creation Forum. それでは日アセアン経済競争フォーラム再開いたします。
We'd like to resume the Japan-ASEAN Economic Co-Creation Forum. The next session is Energy Transitions in Asia through the Asia Zero Emission Community. In this session, panelists representing Japanese and Asian financial institutions and other sectors will discuss their expectations toward the Asian Zero Emissions Community. Now then, let me introduce the moderators and the panelists for you. The moderator is Mr. Terasawa Tatsuya from the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, Chairman and CEO.
And the panelists are alternate chair of ASEAN Business Advisory Council, Mr. Bernardino Vega, head of Digital Finance Development of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, CADIN, Mr. Pandu Patria Sujaril. そしてエリア事務総長渡辺
Area President Mr. Tetsuya Watanabe, and from Keidan-ren, the Japan Business Federation Vice Chair and President Mr. Kubota Masakazu, and from the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, Chair and Director Mr. Takashi Maeda.
Chief Executive Officer Avoitis Power Mr. Manny Rubio 以上の皆様です。それではここからは寺澤さんの
Now then, I'd like to hand over the moderatorship to Mr. Terasawa, please.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Tatsuya Terasawa, and thank you very much for participating in this panel on AZEC. For those of you who may not know well about AZEC, let me explain about AZEC briefly. AZEC stands for Asia Zero Emissions Community. AZEC provides a platform to support the energy transition in Asia to achieve decarbonization, economic growth, and energy security simultaneously. This concept was first proposed by Prime Minister Kishida in January of 2022, last year, and the first ministerial meeting took place in March of this year. Currently, the countries from the ASEAN region, Australia, and Japan are members of this AZEC. Through today's discussion, I hope the understanding about AZEC could be deepened, and also we can identify how AZEC can support the energy transition in Asia. Now, I will have two rounds of questions with my speakers, and after that we will have follow-up questions and Q&A. And there will be a QR code to be displayed on the screen. So for those of you who like to ask questions, please register your questions through this QR code so that at the end of the session, I can pick the questions to be asked to my fellow panelists. So without further ado, let me jump into the first round of questions. It's a simple question. What are the challenges that Asia faces in its energy transition to achieve decarbonization, economic growth, and energy security? I would like to first start with Dino to share with us his view from the ASEAN business community.
Okay, thank you, Terasawa-san, and good afternoon, everyone. I think the biggest challenge for Asia when it comes to net zero is its diversity. I think, how do you classify Asia, right? If you classify it based on GDP, you get China, India, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia. If you classify it based on GDP per capita, you have a different list of countries. You have Singapore, Kuwait, UAE, and all the other regions, Brunei and Taiwan. So Asia's biggest challenge is you need to provide an Asia solution, as I said in my earlier remarks, to this issue. Provide an Asia solution and go sub-regional, because Asia countries are also very diverse. I mean, if you look at tropical Asia, that's nature-based. If you look at urban Asia, you have a certain set of solutions. So I think that's what I would say, that the biggest challenge for Asia currently in order to face this issue is diversity, and that's why you need to have regional solutions, and also, as I said, 21st century solutions for these current issues. So you have to think outside the box. And I think AZEC presents a very unique and timely platform to address this and to actually answer it in a more regional way. Yeah,
okay, Dino, thank you very much. And your wording, Asian solutions.
Yeah.
that is very impressive. We'll talk about the Asian solutions later. So now I'm now asking Pandu also to present the view from Asia's business sector about the challenges that Asia faces in its energy transition.
Yeah, I think for ASEAN, in general, we are in different stages of economic growth and economic situation. But what is good, especially after COP28, there is a clear unity in trying to achieve net zero carbon by a certain year, whether it's 2050 or 2060, depending on that country. And what is also good, after we hosted the ASEAN Summit this year in Jakarta, and also for the next year in Laos, there is a common unity in trying to solve. So most important, we've identified what's the key issue, what we want to do, and then we also know the problem. So rather than here coming out, here are the list of problems, I think what we want to try to share with you is what are the potential solutions. If you talk about main issue is how do you balance between economic growth and sustainability versus trying to achieve net zero. And why is net zero so important? It's actually not for all of us here that's sitting here. It's actually for our children and maybe our grandchildren. That's why we're doing all this, right? And most importantly is that I think with this discussion and using this platform AZEC, and we discussed just previously, I think there is a potential solution and real solution, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now, but today. And it actually comes in how do we can promote technology from the developed countries and using from the developing countries or countries that are growing that has good natural resources and combine it with good technology to lower costs. And when you talk about costs, it's end-to-end, whether it's from the development of the renewable energy and the transmission for it to go to the end market. So I think that's probably just a short remark. So.
Okay, certainly we'll talk about the solutions. But now I will ask Watanabe-san. Watanabe-san is the leader of the think tank covering East Asia, in particular ASEAN. So please provide your views about the challenges that Asia faces in its energy transition.
Thank you, Terasawa-san. And Asia and Southeast Asia in particular is an economic growth center. So it's quite a different situation from other parts of the world, where the developed world economy grow like this, and naturally CO2 emission like this. But here, I mean, in ASEAN, economic growth like this, and that drives the global economic growth, and naturally CO2 emission grow. So the challenge here is this triangular. I mean, in other developed world, you can just cut this part of the emission. But here in ASEAN, you need to cut all the CO2 emission while you have to keep energy security and sustain economic growth. That's a challenge. And also, dependency on the fossil fuel is still high. So as Pandu-san mentioned, that's where innovation and technology comes in, where we need cutting-edge technology and using a different source of energy like ammonia and hydrogen and CCUS. So that's a quite different situation. That's a challenge for the AZEC and opportunity as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Watanabe-san. Now, I would ask Kubota-san. You represent the Keidanren, the Japanese business sector. So what do you see as the challenges?
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak in Japanese, if I may. Well, regarding carbon neutrality, this requires a global response. In particular, as Watanabe-san mentioned earlier, the economic growth is quite significant in Asia, so Asia must aggressively move toward carbon neutrality to address this issue globally. And for Asia in particular, and this is likewise for Japan as well, but there's a high reliance on fire and also the renewable energies, the land or geography or topography which allow for renewable energy is very limited. And so we are relying on the thermal power. And also the industries are centered around manufacturing industry, which of course emits a lot of CO2. So when you consider this, the decarbonization of energy and the decarbonization of industries, these are the two challenges, I think, which we share in common with the ASEAN countries. After Mr. Kishida became Prime Minister, we're working with the Keidanren to develop a major framework for energy transition. DX, or digital transformation framework, has finally been established, and for the next 10 years or so, about 150 trillion yen will be invested both in the public and private sector, and 20 trillion would be the issuance of bonds, and the government will support advanced research and development. So we have a framework now in place, and also the decarbonizing thermal energy such as hydrogen and ammonium and perovskite batteries and storage batteries and CCS and nuclear power will be used to the maximum, and also steel and chemicals industries, which are hard to abate industries, they will also try to decarbonize as much as possible. So the Japanese initiatives towards GX, as well as experience and technology, can contribute to carbon neutrality in Asia. And so under the framework of AZEC, we believe that we'll be able to generate results between Japan and ASEAN. So that's why I peg a lot of hopes and expectations on AZEC.
Thank you very much for sharing with us your high expectation for AZEC. Now moving on to Maeda-san, head of JBIC. JBIC is a very known player in the global financial sector. So please share with us what do you feel about the challenges for Asia?
On challenges that now member of the AZEC, especially that ASEAN member countries face right now, condition of the power generation sector and also of the power storage and also the power transmission and distribution system are so different country by country. For example, in the case of Philippines, that the generation market has been privatized more than 20 years ago. On the other hand, Indonesia and Vietnam, that's a big presence of state-owned enterprises as a power generation sector. So that situation is very different. That's one challenge. Number two, second challenge is that all countries on ASEAN do not want to sacrifice economic growth because of carbon neutrality. So that compatibility in terms of cost, the affordability is very key. Therefore, that this is a big challenge they face. Through the AZEC, Japan is trying to support this, give some solution. I will refer to later.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Maeda-san, to be extremely brief, and probably we will have much more to talk in the second round. Now, going to Manny, representing a Filipino power company. Please share with us your views about the challenges that Asia faces.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Every time I get the opportunity to speak in a conference like this, I start by saying, I know two things are certain. Climate change is real, and there's a need to transition to cleaner technologies as far as generation is concerned. But in our case, whenever people talk about energy transition, we always say, I think, that it should be at the pace where I think it's really well planned, where we don't leave people that are marginalized in terms of accessing cleaner technologies and cleaner source of energy. You know, Philippines is an archipelago of 7,600 islands. Transition is very much dependent on transmission availability. We've always said that without transmission, there's no transition. And to us, that's something that we are actually addressing. However, I think in the transition to cleaner technologies, I think we need to be open to all the technologies that are available there to lower carbon emissions. In our case, looking at, of course, LNG as a transition fuel. We're looking at, in the midterm to long term, as the Philippines has signed recently the 123 agreement with the United States, small modular reactors as an option for the country. And of course, we're watching closely developments on ammonia and hydrogen as having JERA as our partner. But at the end of the day, I think it's really about making sure that the transition towards clean energy doesn't marginalize people, that we need to make sure that the economic growth is sustained, as Ede-san mentioned. No? Countries are actually trying still to compete economically, and we want to make sure that cost of electricity is competitive, and that has something to be considered every time we talk about energy transition.
Well, thank you very much. Now we have a very good understanding about the challenges. Some of the resonating comments was that we need to support the strong growth, and we need to ensure the cost and be realistic and open to various options. So now let's move on to the second part, which is finding the solutions. So what will be the solutions that you consider that will be necessary to address these challenges? And in your view, how could AZEC help provide those solutions to address those challenges? And if I may ask you, if you come up with region-based approaches for this or solutions, I will greatly appreciate your mentioning of regional-based approaches as well. So now, solutions, starting with Dino again.
Sure. I mean, if you look at ASEAN as a whole, and we did this whole exercise this year in our chairmanship, we recognize that for countries in ASEAN, the solution needs to be nature-based, right? ASEAN holds 2 of the 4 largest tropical rainforests in the world, in the islands of Borneo and Papua. And the carbon sequestration area is probably one of the largest in the world, besides the Amazon basin. So in getting a correct framework for, there was an idea called REDD, Reduce Emission Through Deforestation. That was a good framework, but it was not Asian-based, right? So if we provide an Asian-based solution or ASEAN-based solution to a nature-based asset that we provide, then you can talk about carbon markets that's based on a community, based on the interests of the region itself. So that's one. Number 2, we need to also exercise what we call sub-regional developments, right? Sub-regional solutions, because it's different. And I mentioned before, when you're looking at island communities in the Asia or Asia-Pacific area, and some of the rural, some of the urban population in ASEAN, you're going to find different problems, and with those different problems, different priorities. And those solutions have to be based on what technology we have, and be a bit more creative in terms of what we require. In the past, we have one region, maybe in Europe, that has already, provided us what we call one-size-fits-all. And it hasn't really been resonating in our region. And the reason why it's not been resonating, it really doesn't address the energy issue. It doesn't really address, what do you do with the SMEs? How do they transition, right? And how do we help provide a solution for, the majority of the businesses in the ASEAN, which are small?
Okay, thank you very much. So now going to Pandu, any ideas about solutions, especially through AZEC?
Yeah, with respect to AZEC, and we discussed this just before this, I mean, there's really 2 key things. One is actually on the energy side, right? So how do you switch from fossil fuel to renewable-based? And number 2 is actually on the carbon side, carbon market. I don't know if any of you know, Indonesia, along with 2 other countries, are really the lungs of the earth. So you need investment in both. So talking very pragmatic here, if you talk from the energy side, to go to renewable, a lot of it actually depends on 2 things. Investment into transmission, and we can discuss later the financing issue with that, but there's a solution, so transmission, right? Number 2 is in terms of going to renewable, what are the best ones in the next 10 to 20 years? And a lot of it is technologically involved. Indonesia, I'm just giving an example for Indonesia, for example. A lot of people talk about geothermal, etc., but there's a lot of risks associated with that. Wind is very specific location. There is 2 that potentially can work, but you have to communicate it very well. Number 1 is nuclear. Right? So some of you like, whoa, nuclear. Actually, it actually worked and has worked. Number 2, I think this is the future, and the future is actually not far away. It's related to hydrogen. Okay? On the carbon base, how do you create a carbon market? This year, Indonesia introduced a carbon market to trade in the Indonesian stock exchange. How can you increase investment for people to do reforestation. That's it. These are the two. I make it very simple, and then obviously we can discuss offline.
Okay, great. Now, Watanabe-san, your ideas about solutions?
I think, I guess basic point is, as Dino-san mentioned, that Asian solution. A solution should not coming from some other part of the world. The solution comes up from here, I mean from ASEAN and other parts of Asia. That's a basic point. And so that's number one. Number two is, I mean, business driven. There are a lot of potential and opportunities in this part of the region. As Dino-san mentioned that many good areas for sequestration of CO2, and also rainforest and mangrove. I mean, nature-based solution can be possible, and there are a lot of investment opportunities, and there are many Japanese companies who has good technology and experience to serve the solution for the region. So there will be a lot of opportunities. Of course, that's a challenge, but opportunity. Number three is, of course, financing to the transition technologies. That's number three. But on that one, Maeda-san will talking about later. But the area provided transition technology list, identify CCUS, co-firing, and also we had the study group for the transition financing involving financial institutions, Japan, ASEAN, and other parts of the region. So the basic point is, of course, net zero is a global agenda, but the basic point is we have to solve the global issues locally. That's the point. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now, Kuboto-san, your views about the solutions?
Yes. The road to carbon neutrality, I think this was discussed earlier, but depending on the nation and the region, I think there could be different options and roads. In Asia, there are various commonalities among the nations and regions. So AZEC, what it needs to do first is towards carbon neutrality, understand that there are different roadmaps to carbon neutrality compared to the Western nations and communicate that to the region. So this year in October, as with the chairman of K-Damren, I visited the EU and I met the ministerial level people at the EU Commission to talk about this, and the goals are common, but I think the roadmap to that goal was different compared to Japan. We do have various options, and there is transition. I mean, whether it's technology or financing, it's very important, and that was the point that we made, but it didn't seem to ring a bell with our EU colleagues. So Japan just talking about it probably will not help us in making the global rules, because we're limited in population and territory. So if we can communicate this from AZEC, I think it will be helpful for rulemaking, and I think we'll have a larger voice to the outer world. So I think we need to communicate that, and power can't go to zero emission right away. We'll have to use LNG, and we'll have to co-fire ammonia and hydrogen in the meantime, and I think we'll have to take steps. And then there's one more issue, carbon neutrality, and the road to carbon neutrality will have to be technical, and we'll have to have an implementation system. Japanese companies do have very good technologies to do this, so those are the kind of technologies that could be rolled out based out of AZEC, and I think that implementation is also very important. And in that process, well, K-Damren has a joint credit mechanism. So the CO2 goes down in our partner country, and then we can count that to the Japanese decrease in carbon emissions. So if that can be kind of applied widely, I think we will take further steps. And so the government is who we're talking to regarding this system.
There's been so many points made about the necessity of financing. And Maeda-san, I would like to talk about the financing. I was in Dubai participating in the COP28, and one of the major discussions is that there is a huge gap between the investment necessary and the reality of the investment, and the gap was huge, and there is lack of financing to fill in that gap. Maeda-san, as a leader of JBIC, how can JBIC or other Japanese or maybe other financial institutions in ASEAN region help narrow this financing gap? And the follow-up question, I will lead to the Q&A. So please answer your solution, especially filling in this financial gap.
Okay, well, before that, answering your question, Teresa-san, about finance, I'd like to very quickly highlight on the difference between AZEC and JETP, Just Energy Transition Platform, the initiative by G7, because Japan is president of G7 this year. JETP does not address the role of LNG. JBIC does. JETP does not address the role of nuclear. JETP does not. AZEC does. Also, that key importance, as referring to your question, Mr. about finance, the JETP use a terminology of G funds. However, this is a very conceptual, not tangible one. So AZEC is going to formulate a very more tangible, specific framework for financing to fulfill the gap. This is very different. And also that AZEC is engaging with different conditions of country by country. For example, that Vietnam, Indonesia, two countries are targeted of JETP. But the situation is very different. Vietnam, for example, the coal-fired plant was introduced less than 5 years ago, more. So it's a very new plant. It is not impossible to scrap the coal-fired power plants immediately. In case of Indonesia, some of them introduced more than 10 years ago. Therefore, that we're going to accelerate early retirement of the coal-fired power plants by means of the coal conversion of ammonia, for example. This is a very different situation. Therefore, that AZEC is going to engage with country by country. As chairman of JBIC, also that I'm special advisor to cabinet in charge of AZEC, I've already created some certain specific mechanism, country by country. First, Vietnam. Second, Indonesia. I'm going to do the same thing in the Philippines. So that this is an engagement specifically. And also that the financial issue I will discuss more in later.
Okay, fine. Manny, solutions?
Yeah, well, this is the first time I'm going to say something about an ASEAN-centric solution rather than a Philippine-centric solutions. Aboitiz Power has focused in the Philippines. But I think one of the things that we're looking at to transition to cleaner futures, the energy transition mechanisms that are available and that we're discussing with multilaterals. At the moment, well, the scheme and the framework is not really compelling to make us really jump into the solutions. But so maybe I think an ASEAN-centric, it's like an ASEAN portfolio of carbon and power plants that I think could probably work, given that there's a bigger portfolio you can play with rather than just a single entity in the country like Philippines making commitments to decarbonize, which probably won't even move the needle. Second, I think, is one of the biggest costs for transitioning to cleaner energy is cost of financing, and of course, in the execution of the projects, delays, cost overruns. I think what ASEC can do is probably come up with a center of excellence where we can train people to come up with a single EPC, for example, right, and be the best-in-class EPC that can service ASEAN requirements for that matter. Maybe a long shot, but I think it's a framework, a kind of framework thinking. I think is something that we can that is something that we can aim for. And then lastly, one of the risks we've identified also in the transition is the risk of the supply chain. We're very reliant on certain countries for solar panels, for wind. I think maybe ASEAN or ASEC can actually come up with a framework to secure an inter-ASEAN supply chain that we can actually look after ourselves, rather than relying on single set of suppliers outside of the group.
Okay, great. We've had many ideas about the solutions, but many of them were interesting. So let me follow up on your suggestions.
Yeah.
Dino, you stressed the Asian solution, okay. And probably, I assume, very different from the European or the American approach.
Yeah.
But frankly, so far, most of the international discussion has been led by the European countries or the US.
Right.
Well, I take your point. There has to be an Asian solution,
right.
An Asian voice. But so far, the reality is that the Asian voice has not been really heard in the global fora. So how can we change this situation? And how can AZEC potentially play a role in speaking out to the world much more effectively?
I think that's the fact that ASEC is established. It plays a very unique role. Number one, through its supporters like AREA, that has been engaged in ASEAN over the last, 10, 20 years, has become a partner in the region and a trusted a source of partnership. So that's one thing. Throughout the ASEAN experience, we know how integrated the Japanese investment has been, not only in energy, but also in the other parts of investment. So the Japanese investment in the ASEAN isn't something new for us, right? So AZEC, through Japan, can lead, actually, together with ASEAN, a wider discussion, right, to provide this, we're coining now the Asian solution, right, to energy transition. Maeda-san hit the needle on the head, providing for example, LNG is a reality in Asia. That should be part of a solution. Nuclear power, and also what we call a country-by-country solution, or a sub-regional solution to address some of those energy transition problems. So that's why I think this is so important, the establishment of this discussion, this forum, and then I think Manny has also made a good point, using this platform to provide a more robust supply chain on some of the energy technology and equipment needed in ASEAN.
Oh, excellent point, Dino. I think the consensus is that Asia is not similar with our European friends or America, and we have to speak out and present our Asian solution to the world. And rather than having each country speak out, it would be better for AZEC as a whole to speak out. An excellent point. But speak out, we have to describe what we mean by Asian solution and what are the differences. So we need to have substance behind this voice. So Watanabe-san, as a leader of a think tank, especially covering ASEAN, what would be the substance of the Asian solution, and how can you help present those Asian solutions to the world?
Thank you very much. Number one is the situation is quite different. Economic growth and it's quite different, and also quite different between ASEAN and Europe and North America, but even different among ASEAN countries. Economic situation and endowment, renewable potential, and quite different. So that's a sort of a starting point. Number two, it's innovation and the technology play a role. As many mentioned that CCUS and co-firing and other technologies. So that's number 2, innovation and technology driven. Number 3, I guess, is even the framework, like Pandusan mentioned, the carbon market. So regional solution is needed. And regarding a carbon market, for example, there are some of the countries who has a huge potential for carbon sink, like rainforestry and mangrove. And for example, talking about Laos, they have a hydropower. So if region introduce a carbon trading system, they can sell as credit, not just the hydropower itself, but they can sell the credit. That's the kind of situation. So even the approach to the institutional or regulatory framework, it's a way to address in a manner of Asia. And the area is located at Jakarta, at the center of the economic growth in ASEAN. And of course, Philippine minister is here, Excellency is here. So we are working for Philippines and other countries in the region. But as a knowledge partner, to bring the different voice of the countries and the different voice of governments and policymakers and investors and business sectors and startups, for that, the area can serve as a policy platform to bring the voice of the region to be heard globally.
Okay. Let me go to specific elements of the solution, and certainly financing is certainly a part. And as I said, there is a huge financial gap between what is required and the reality. And please explain how JBIC can narrow the gap, in particular, but not limited to, how can you provide financing for transmission, which is absolutely necessary, but difficult to finance, because the cash flow for transmission lines are very modest in the short term and the midterm. Yeah. So that's the first part of the question. The second question is that not just having JBIC provide the financing, you have to have others play the role, because with all due respect to JBIC cannot provide all the financing. So how can you enable other players to provide the financing in line with your argument? So 2 questions.
Okay, so quickly we touch upon that my discussion with Secretary John Kerry, who is the presidential envoy of the United States, twice. He said that, for example, in the case of Vietnam, in middle of 2030, the renewable energy can be the main source of supply of the power. But I made a question to him, okay, but renewable energy is not stable power, therefore that in terms of output, so that they need the storage of power storage equipment. How you conceive this, and who can finance? That Special Envoy Kerry did not reply to my question. So that it means that the US and also that in the EU are not prepared that the way to fulfill the gap of funding. So my case is that we are more starting from more specific project. Concept is okay, but project by project, we need to figure out what is the gap of the finance, and also that we're going to give the appropriate solution one by one. No conceptual cookie cutter solution is right. So that we are now engaged in the really financial needs, project by project, country by country, together with the involvement of private sector, both Japanese and also the host countries and others. So that's a very important key. We need to figure out what the gap, to what extent it is impact, so that we need to learn first. Second, the problems of the main financial sector is right now that they already made a commitment under TCFD. Therefore, that in terms of the additional funding, they don't want to provide any financing to the fossil fuel sector, even LNG. They're very reluctant right now, getting more reluctant. Therefore, that this is very hard to fill the gap. Therefore, in order to fill the gap, we have to find out the alternative source of fund. One is sovereign wealth fund of oil and gas producing country. I already talked to this issue with the Mubadala and also the ADIA and also the Saudi Aramco, and also PIF. Those players. Those players, they have an amount of money to be available for the financing too. Second is the fund from the different players like BlackRock or those private equity asset management company. They have assets both in fossil fuel and renewable energy. They can balance. It's therefore that there's an additional source of power, source of the finance. Therefore, that all available funding must be arranged, must be blended, so that JP can play the role of some of a coordinator of those different sources of the finance to concentrate on the gap of this. And also that additional element is that the new technology, like new product like hydrogen, ammonia, this cost is very high right now. For example, in the case of hydrogen, it's more than $400 per ton. It's very expensive. We need to make this cost, to reduce the cost and make affordable. And for that purpose, Asia has a huge demand. This is advantage. Europe does not have a demand. US had a massive fund from IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, but they're only at the production side. They want to cover that full supply chain. So we need to create demand. Demand can reduce the cost. So that I think that this is a Asia solution. This is the initiative by AZEC in Japan.
Okay, great. For those who recall the history of LNG, the LNG market was developed in Asia by Asia. And with the Russian invasion into Ukraine, our European friends had to scramble to access the LNG market, and they came to the Asian LNG market to get access to LNG. We never got appreciation from them, but I think it is important that Asia led the LNG market. My view is that we can do the same, and we have to do the same with hydrogen and ammonia. It took us 50 years to develop the LNG market to where we are today. Yeah. We have to do it much faster for hydrogen and ammonia. And Maeda-san is right that we have to make that happen. And I think it's related to hydrogen. If I can ask Pandu, one aspect of ASEAN is very strong in manufacturing. Manufacturing, generally speaking, comprise of the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, emitting lots of CO2. But at the same time, we have to realize growth, but we have to reduce CO2 emission. In your view, what would need to be a part of the solution to overcome this dilemma, especially for the ASEAN manufacturing sector?
So maybe just to touch your point from Asia, for Asia, which actually becomes a global solution, maybe that's one thing that we need to learn from the LNG market, for the hydrogen market. Maybe we should set the narrative, create the narrative, and create the rule base. And I think this is where AZEC can play a massive role. And honestly, if it becomes successful again in terms of hydrogen ammonia, we should be able to control that narrative. And I think that's probably the most underlying important point. Talking about hydrogen as a solution, obviously we've done a lot of work. Indonesia obviously has done a lot of work. ASEAN countries have done quite a bit of work. At the end, it's costs, but we know that, so it's well identified. So the question is to bring that cost down, what does it take? Is it technology, or is it, in a way, quote unquote, subsidized cost of funding? So if we're truly serious about it, I think there is both a B2B solution related to this, and there is maybe a potential G2G element too to get this solved. And the reason why this is important, given that geopolitics probably has become the top of mind for 2023, and my strong guesstimate it'll be a big issue 2024, maybe top of mind. I think this ASEAN as well, the AZEC, in a way, is one way we can play this hydrogen solution. Really, it's a topical issue. Now the issue is how do we bring it forward? Specific for Indonesia, 2031 is really the first time we're going to do it. I think you already know that too, sir. And how do we bring this earlier? And again, it's a combination of B2B as well, G2G.
Oh, great. I think we heard about a variety of technologies, including nuclear and including hydrogen, ammonia. I believe the Japanese business sector has been leading the world in such technologies. How can the Japanese business sector, this is a question towards Kubota-san, how can the Japanese business sector work together with our friends in ASEAN to enable the introduction of such technologies, nuclear, hydrogen, and CCS, any other new technologies?
All right, thank you very much for that question. So at the Keidanren, for our membership companies, we do conduct surveys. And so 2050 carbon neutral is the goal. So how can each membership company or can each industry sector achieve this goal is always being discussed. And so we also consider what is the breakthrough technology that allows us to go into that direction. So we are deliberating this as well. Steel, for instance, is one, and chemicals or industries where there is high emission of CO2. I do believe that a technical breakthrough is a must, is needed. But as I mentioned earlier, the new Japan government framework issuing GX bonds to promote and lead such advanced technologies, and again working in collaboration between both the public and private sector, which is already beginning, but we need to promote this more. And so we will obviously stumble on various new ideas, and I do believe that that will be promising, and I do believe that there is strong potential as well in the horizon.
If I may jump on to Manny, you mentioned the importance of having a resilient supply chain. Now, many countries are talking about resilience of supply chain, but to make that into reality, especially in this region, the AZEC members, what do you think will be the concrete steps or measures that will be required to realize resilient supply chain for the AZEC countries?
Yeah, thank you. I think the way I'm going to answer that is let's expand the options, make it broader, right? Instead of just talking about ammonia, hydrogen, and LNG, I think we also need to look into, which I am actually more optimistic of actually probably being the solution of the future, is energy storage, in terms of getting to a more competitive level. I'm biased against. Unfortunately, I've worked for 20 years for one of the leading industrial gas companies in the world, and I've built hydrogen plants and air separation units, so I know how much it takes to produce nitrogen and hydrogen. That you do the math, it's still, to use hydrogen as fuel to produce energy, it's still net negative. You're still using more energy than producing energy if you're using it as fuel. So you really have to have surplus, cheap surplus energy to power production of hydrogen. But I think when we talk about resilience, and one of the ways to be resilient is to having a secure supply chain, well, let's focus on a certain technology, for example. I don't think we can be focused on a broad range of technology and be a specialist on all of it. I doubt if that can be possible, but I think ASEAN can focus on a certain technology, maybe, for example, solar manufacturing facilities across Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, on different components, right? And then and share duty-free and even share manufacturing facilities and manufacturing talents to start with. I guess if we're talking about a supply chain for the region, maybe that can be a start.
Okay, great. Pandu, you mentioned about the question of carbon. We tend to talk about energy only, but we have to talk about carbon. And also Kubota-san talked about the bilateral framework for JCM for carbon. I think it's a very important point. But to make sure that there will be an effective carbon market, today I think it is within Indonesia only. To have a much larger carbon market, maybe extended to ASEAN, and maybe extending further to ASEAN as a whole, including Japan and Australia. What needs to happen to take us from where we are, a country-limited carbon market, to a much more regional ASEC-based carbon market?
Yeah, at the end, I think again, I'm biased. I'm a business person. So I really do believe that a lot of it is, has to be based on investment, and there has to be a return on this invested capital in excess of its cost of capital. I mean, that's overall underlying. I would say in terms of this can be driven by policy. And our policy today, obviously, how can we have a policy that increases investment? And for that to happen, it cannot be national based, it has to be global based. Yeah. And overall underlying is how do you increase investment in terms of reforestation, right? In terms of increased investment into creating a proper carbon market that fits a global standard. Again, it's policy, but underlying behind that, and this is a personal take, is that I am a business person. I do believe that ROIC has to be above cost of capital, and really the way to drive it is through policy making. So we already have the infrastructure today. Now we just have to open it both regionally and globally.
Okay, I think what I've heard from you is that nature-based solution is very important, and the definition of those have been so far being set by our friends in Europe, not from the Asian perspective. So I assume in order to have an effective carbon market of carbon trading, we have to define the carbon credits in line with the Asian solution. And that would lead to the question of rulemaking, I believe. And also that will lead to other transactions, for example, hydrogen, clean hydrogen. What do we mean by clean hydrogen? There has to be definition and certification. So these kind of rulemaking, standard setting, verification, that could be done better on a region-based, wide basis to realize economy of scale. In that regard, area, your think tank in Asia, how can you help those rule-making, including standardization and certification?
I think AZEC cannot achieve without rulemaking or just doing a specific project. That facilitating a specific project is very important, and we need to deliver business collaboration and specific project with the proper financing. But this AZEC is a sort of a mid and long-term project, and we need to have a sort of long target to achieve net zero target in Asian way. For that one, we need institutional framework, regulatory framework. So carbon trading market is one of the key issues. Of course, it's may not different from the one in Europe, but we have some. We need to come up with some Asian model for carbon trading. That's number one. I think for energy transition, finance sectors, not just investing transition technology, but also dealing with the carbon from the financial perspective is very important. So that's number one. Number two is it's a regional framework. So now ASEAN is talking about ASEAN power grid. So Philippines and Indonesia, different economic situation and different endowment of renewable and sequestration. So we need to sort of to achieve the energy security, regional solution is needed. So that is why now ASEAN is talking about ASEAN power grid.
Okay.
So it's a framework issues. So for that one area, as a knowledge partner, regional knowledge partner can play a role, collecting different voices and opinions.
Okay. I think there was a consensus that we need to speak out to the world through AZEC, presenting the Asian solution and Asian situation. But I've received some question from the audience that, there is some skepticism in the West that AZEC is against our attempts towards decarbonization. There are people with skepticism it can happen. For example, co-firing of coal with ammonia is always being criticized. And Maeda-san, you have been dealing with the sort of Western financial sector, and you have been faced with this kind of criticism against the Asian approach or Asian solution. What will be the effective way to deal with those criticisms, and how can AZEC help in responding to those criticisms?
Okay, there are two different issues. One is carbon credit, integrity or quality of a carbon credit. So now the Europeans attack on carbon credit because of quality of credit, or especially voluntary credit. There's no verification mechanism yet created and standards. They were there to say, criticize that this is a greenwash. That's a very much European argument. But therefore, that we need to make some mechanism of verification to keep integrity of the carbon credit. And the EU already started the EU ETS trading. Also that the border adjustment mechanism. That, for example, that in aviation fuel, also vessel fuel, of ships, the cargo owner, for example, that have to pay surcharge if you use that crude oil. Mm-hmm. And then that Brussels will absorb those surcharges, and for the fund for the subsidize the EV. Who is the beneficiary? China. China beneficiary. So that is through European. That's a mechanism that they are doing too. We need to undercut this of this circle, and we give some of the benefit to fast mover. That's my sense. This is a very important thing. And the second, rule setting. European one is a sort of window dressing. Therefore, that that they say that it's green. But regardless of the color, blue, green, whatever, there's no standard of the quality of the hydrogen ammonia which represent green. Only from renewable energy say green, but it's not transparent. We need to have most transparent standard, the internationally recognized transitional standard, which is carbon intensity. This is very scientific based and transparent, so that Japan can lead these arguments with our friends and colleagues of the AZEC, and to make really clear, transparent rule setting. These two things are very important in the framework of the AZEC. So AZEC also includes that framework of JCM, like Kodo-san said. But JCM is a bilateral credit. Therefore, that is very vulnerable from the criticism from Europeans. Therefore, that we need to have a verification mechanism. That's very key important to the answer against those criticism from Europeans.
Okay, great. Manny, you mentioned the Center of Excellence, and I believe that is to develop the necessary human resources. There's always attention made to the lack of financing, but there's also a lack of talents.
Yeah.
Engineers, experienced workers, and so on. Is there any region-wide solution to deal with this lack of human resources? And how can AZEC help address this question about human resources?
Well, certainly talents are needed as we transition, regardless of the technology that we're putting and regardless of what they're doing from execution to operations. I think the ASEAN, AZEC countries, including Japan, Australia, don't lack these talents as we move forward. But the countries in particular probably may be lacking in some of the talents needed to actually adjust. So if there's a way, a mechanism for AZEC to come up with a framework for talent sharing, then I think that would actually really help the transition of especially the countries that are in need of talents.
Well, great. We've heard many excellent ideas with regard to how AZEC can help address all the challenges that Asia is facing in its energy transition. Yeah. But to be very candid, yes, AZEC is not well known in the ASEAN region yet. And I will ask Dino, yes, as a leader of the ASEAN business community, how can we deepen and spread the recognition about AZEC among our friends in the ASEAN region? And how can we ensure that those players, the companies, SMEs, and individuals, can look towards AZEC as a part of the solution, and how can they capitalize on AZEC?
Great. I think there's three things. Number one, I think AZEC should take advantage of the various ASEAN platforms that are available, including the ASEAN Buck. I think we do have a net zero initiative and also carbon center of excellence initiative. That can be involved, and Watanabe-san and I have been discussing that. Second, I think we need to recognize that maybe nobody knows us in the room besides us right now, but we need to start now. And there's a mantra saying, if not now, then when? If not us, then who, right? So we need to be, we need to own our future. And I think ASEAN and the Asia region should also understand that this is going to be, if we don't, and then the third thing, and I've learned this from my discussions with Europe, with the European Union, if we are not at the table, we're part of the menu. Right.
Okay.
So we need to be part of this discussion. If we're not, then we're part of the menu. Right. Thank you.
Well, great point. I think through today's discussion, I think our understanding about AZEC has been really deepened. And frankly, I have to confess that I've learned a lot of new ideas of how AZEC can deliver its mission. And we heard a lot of comparison between EU and us. And there's a lot that we don't agree with EU. But I think to do justice to our European friends, EU has been very good by uniting, being able to send a stronger voice to the world. Mm-hmm. And they have been very good at rule setting and also the market creation. And they have a very good transmission, including their the infrastructure, including their transmission lines. And they have good way to utilize their talent, the pool of talents, and also a good financing scheme. So yes, we don't necessarily agree with our European friends, but we have to learn from the European initiative by uniting, working together. They are making much more to happen compared with each individual country working. So while I agree with Dino, we have to talk about the Asian solution, our differences, but just talking within the room will not be sufficient. We agree among ourselves. We have to work, speak out, and have actions. And I strongly believe AZEC could be a platform to make that happen. And we need to have a lot more people in the ASEAN region know about AZEC and try to think about how can we utilize AZEC. We should build upon the ASEAN platform, but we have more. In addition to ASEAN, we have Japan and Australia and possibly others as members for AZEC. So we can do more than what ASEAN can do alone. So this is, I think, a good starting point to look at the potential, to know about AZEC, look about the potential, and start telling your colleagues back in Indonesia, Philippines, and so on, and back in Japan, to talk about what is AZEC, what are the potentials, and start working on. Today, we heard about many potentials, including technology, financing, infrastructure, rulemaking, and human resources, and finally speak out Asia's views to the world. So I hope your understanding about AZEC has deepened. And if you did not know about AZEC before coming to the room, please start talking about AZEC with your friends and your colleagues and find out what we can do to build upon. AZEC is something that will not be delivered from somewhere. We are players for AZEC. Yeah. We come up with our proposals from the business sector and for the government people and think tanks. And I think it's a co-creation. The topic of today is co-creation. Let's co-create AZEC together. And on Monday, there will be the first leaders meeting for AZEC. And today's discussion will be a valuable input to this process. So once again, let's turn this great potential of AZEC into reality. And as I said, it's co-creation. Let's work together. Thank you very much for your participation. And give a round of applause for the speakers.
Thank you very much, all the panelists, and Mr. Teragawa for moderating this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
以上をもちまして日 ASEAN 経済競争フォーラムアジアゼロエミッション共同体
This concludes ASEAN-Japan Economic Co-Creation Forum, Asia's Energy Transition through AZEC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening. The next session, which is closing session, will start from 5:40 p.m. The next session, closing session, will start from 5:40 p.m. Please be back and be seated by then. 続きましてクロージングセッションを行います。17時40分からの再開を予定しております。17時40分からの再開です。それでは再開までどうぞ今しばらくご休憩ください。